Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. I'm your host, Cory, and today we're continuing our conversation from last week with Don Perras. Don, if you remember from last week, is a retired professor of special education at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, as well as an independent consultant since the 70s, specializing in differentiated instruction, classroom management practices, secondary grade levels, and has coached over 1,300 educators around the U.S., really targeting a lot of his support for new teachers, beginning staff members, and he's focused a lot of his work around teacher mental health. And so Don joined us last week to talk with us a little bit about the state of teachers' mental health, especially with some of the circumstances and pandemic education in our world right now, post-COVID. And today, we're going to be talking about how, as coaches, once we know how to identify, as we talked about in last week's episode, how can we support teacher mental health? So, Don, welcome back.
Thank you, Cory. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to have you back again. I know it was a popular topic last week, and continues to be, of course. Mm-hmm. And really, this is because, and we talked a little bit about this last week as well, as coaches and leaders, we are right now really trying to dance this fine line between when and how much support to provide to teachers who we know are completely overwhelmed and exhausted physically and mentally as they are starting their school years back to learning, because that learning looks so different. And even next week, we're uncertain in many circumstances. Will we be in person? Will we be remote? Will we be hybrid? Maybe I'm living a hybrid teaching life right now, and I'm teaching to in-person students and students who are streaming online. And I'm trying to do the very best I can for all of my students. But I have this heavyweight feeling, as many teachers are perfectionists, that I'm not quite doing it right. How do I know if I am? And so a lot of the educators and leaders I've talked to, they're right now really trying to figure out what's the best way to utilize their support staff and their coaches, or as educational leaders, help support their teachers in a way that helps them feel lifted up and not as if they're being asked to do one more thing on top of everything that they're trying to manage. They really want to be that supportive role because they see the exhaustion and they're concerned about teacher turnover early in the year if they can't support teachers. So it is definitely a rough year and a rough start for everybody, but everyone's doing their best, right?
I'll say it's complex. That's a simplistic way of describing it.
It is, yes.
Just out of sheer curiosity to our listeners, 2 districts that I've had association with in Connecticut as a consultant, they are already looking for replacement staff, and school opened within the last 5 days. Does that make any sense? And it's because of everything you so beautifully summarized. They can't even find substitutes to come in on a short-term basis because of that fact. So just imagine in my little space in the universe, and then broadcasting that across the country. Yeah, this is a serious topic. So I thought today we could take a look at some strategies, because I think that's what will be the most effective use of our time. But it is such an enormous issue. I'm not sure there's a simple solution, but certainly let's explore some of the suggestions and see if there might be a connection to anybody in our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a lot of people connect to your episode last week. You know, some of our viewers said, you know, absolutely, teachers have a wealth of new information, or you know, they're being asked to do the same thing in a new environment, and sometimes it feels like we're oversimplifying what we're asking them to do. Sometimes it feels like we're not being descriptive enough. There's a really great video out, and I had posted it a couple of weeks ago on my Facebook page, from one of the television shows, Schitt's Creek, and they're trying to do a recipe, and she's reading the recipe off, and she says, so now next step is to fold the cheese. And the other person goes, what do you mean by fold the cheese? What does that mean? And she said, I don't know, fold the cheese. What do you mean fold the cheese? So Or really, there's lots of questions and nobody quite knows the answer
No,
right now
they
because
don't.
we're in new territory. There is no real best practices for this exact scenario. We know what works well
Right.
in blended instruction, and we have some research around online, but not at this level through these circumstances, adding the trauma and everything else to it.
Mm-hmm.
So last week we talked about some ways to identify, even through this smiling face and, yeah, I'm doing great from a teacher. What are some indicators that we can start to see as leaders that
Right.
maybe everything is not okay? Things like their an inability to maintain accountability for some things, or showing up late, or
Right.
not having things done.
Mhm.
Like, these are telltale signs that someone is overwhelmed and has more on their plate than they can handle. Maybe that they're short, right,
Mhm.
with other folks. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think in summation, you could argue changes in mood.
Mhm.
We talked a little bit about that issue with apathy,
Right.
low energy, people not being responsible for time management. It's very difficult to balance inclusion, hybrid learning, distance learning. It's all uncharted territory.
Right.
So how are teachers going to stabilize themselves, because they're the critical key to the whole process? Obviously, the students are receivers, we're the presenters. So I think we could look for some of those ideas, just maybe a general level of commitment. A lot of stuff, it sounds kind of fuzzy, but if you know the person involved, you can see that there's a pattern to their behavior. Everybody has highs and lows, we know that. But I think over time, I've noticed this even when I have consulted, you can see just the slightest variation in the way teachers perceive a problem, how much effort they're going to commit to help resolve the problem. I also think I like the word independence.
Mhm.
Teachers who you can trust have a high level of independence because they're accountable. They know how to move forward. Many of the teachers I see that are stressed, they almost kind of what I call plateau emotionally and psychologically.
Mhm.
That's a dangerous indicator because now you have to intervene. Otherwise, it'll perpetuate itself. Then you have a negative cycle, correct?
Right.
Look at people who have high absenteeism. I know we mentioned that. People who are late to meetings, even that's the subtlest thing. I've worked with people who don't take advice. You'll give them scripted advice, kind of what you would do with virtual coaching. Nothing follows it. So you now know that there's a blockage. I think that's a common denominator in a whole mess of people. It's not for an exclusively small group, like you might
Right.
think.
Right. Yeah. All of these are indicators that we might have a teacher who's struggling with stress and overwhelm.
Yep.
It could be the relationship between the coach and coachee, but
Mhm.
it's a pretty good assumption, or at least an indicator to investigate a little bit more, I think,
Absolutely.
that they might be overwhelmed. So what can we do as coaches? How can we be proactive in supporting teacher mental health, Don?
Would you like to go to the first slide? Would that be all right for us? Yeah. By the way, these slides are going to appear in an odd order, pardon me. They're from multiple webinars on this topic, so I chose a couple that will allow for some discussion today. If you read these 3 points, these are a little bit broader possibly than an individual coach would be responsible for or can relate to, but they're all sage advice. Look at the first one alone. We could talk about that one for the next 15 minutes. Now all we have to consider is, gee, I've done this successfully for a long block of time. Suddenly I'm now going to be talking to people through Zoom. They're going to be at home. I'll see them Tuesday and Wednesday in the week. You can already just sense intellectually how complex that's going to be. So I think the very first point to me is just significant to the extreme. What are the resources available? What will do I know scope and sequence of a curriculum per subject, let's say? Will there be adequate supplies, materials, the use of the internet? You could go on literally for page after page on this particular one point. Let's argue this is a work in progress, and that's being said kindly, yes, if you consider across all the districts and situations. In the Northeast, my area, some districts have ample supplies, financial backing, tremendous community input. You can't make that statement everywhere, obviously, and we're back to the same point. The next one down, I want to do this rather quickly. We mentioned this, and I still think it's worth noting. Behavioral issues are going to eventually cycle through this process, correct? Especially if you have the hybrid model, because Johnny's not going to be sitting with you 5 days a week live in class. So they're adjusting as we're accommodating that adjustment. I think some kids are going to find that this is an opportunity to be disruptive, behaviorally inappropriate, whatever. So I think any school, any district, item 2 is really crucial. We have to establish behavioral expectations, including, by the way, how does Johnny and Mary behave at home, correct? True? As you already know, that's going to create all kinds of conflicts. You might want to comment on the third one because you're coming from a different area of the country. Think of how significant that point is. Do we have adequate social workers, counselors, quote, psychologists, and especially now, because we already admitted this generation of kids at this point is experiencing a lot of personal trauma and issues from home, community, and this whole new experience. You sense that's a big concern in your general area? The last point?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the major concerns. It was one of the biggest areas that a lot of schools noticed as they went into emergency online instruction is some of the less engaged families, the students where there were some concerns about their well-being at home, or we know that they didn't have the support system at home that some of our other students had. They kind of dropped off, and it was hard to get a hold of them. And this year, I'm finding many schools are being much more accountable in what online or hybrid instruction's looking like, as far as how students are being counted as in attendance, and the ways in which cameras on and that they have to, speak in to say here kind of thing. But it's definitely something, as we think about our communities. Again, we've got this whole pandemic that's adding to the stressors that were already in existence before March, and it has maybe even amplified that. So definitely our positive behavior support systems, our relationship and rapport, that's what many of our teachers are focused on. But I love these three, and I like that you've categorized these as procedural, right? These are things that as a coach I can be aware of, I can advocate for, or as a leader on my campus I can look to. Many campuses and districts have invested in a lot of resources to support online learning. Much of that is maybe not yet dived into, or haven't had as good of training as teachers are feeling it out. But as a coach, I can maybe help connect that teacher to, hey, there's this resource that can help you do that asynchronous piece a little bit better. It looks like you're spending a lot of time. I think for me as a coach, it's diving into identifying why we are feeling so overwhelmed. What is it specifically, and what's a way that we can take a small step, right, to supporting this? Maybe I'm connecting you to an instructional resource that's going to make your life a little bit easier once we get through the learning curve. Maybe I'm helping you address the behavioral concerns that you have. Maybe I'm connecting you to the right counselor or person who can come and help and support your students or yourself. So I think those are definitely important to consider.
Let's go to the next slide, because we're literally in alignment with that exact next material here we'll look at. Now, this is a bit more classroom, if you'll pardon the term, focus. So just looking at the first one, this is where coaching would obviously enter the equation. We have to generalize because it's a broad topic. I would love to see many, many more levels of support from administrative, through coaches, colleagues, trusted allies, whatever term you prefer. I have to say, from my experience, which is fairly extensive, particularly when you get to the high school level, a lot of teachers feel relatively alone. They become enmeshed with their academic group or team. I would like to see way more supervision, administrators, walkthroughs, just socializing, some impersonal kind of connection where they're coming in just to engage with people. So I think the very first point to me has significance that is widespread across this topic. I know for a fact, and I have to say this with extreme care, I myself have been sometimes the only outside person coming into these classrooms in an entire year's duration, if that makes sense to you, correct? So the teachers will say, oh, I'm going to see Don every month or so. They'll have my name on the calendar. And I think, wow, that's impressive. That certainly makes me feel valuable. But there's kind of a hidden agenda. That means they're not getting enough of the first point that's referenced on this slide. And I think you understand my point without too much further. And then that leads us to the next point. We need a team of mentors. We have to have a collegial kind of relationship with people who are trustworthy and caring. This is clearly a role of a coach. Use that word counseling carefully, but it's implied. I just know young teachers need this almost to a level of desperation, if I could be that dramatic about it. And again, we almost assume that after third, fourth, fifth year of teaching, you kind of become this independent, all-knowing person. What career could compare with that? Think about any other profession, nursing, medical, what have you. You're evolving constantly. You're always getting training, supervision, feedback, coaching. I don't think we've invested enough of this in our profession, to be honest. So this,
even pre-pandemic, it hasn't.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm talking general terms, no question. And I like the third point, and I've been getting more of my principals involved at this level. You need to have kind of a free, open opportunity, to just express yourself on some kind of a monthly basis. I would say it's non-evaluative, coffee and donuts kind of cliche, maybe after school every Wednesday or so. Something like that is implied in the third point. I'm arguing this is significant now to the extreme.
Yeah, and what I love about these points that you have on this slide here, as we're looking at the frequency of visiting, just as a way to kind of say, I'm here, or do you need help with that? This week on our Wednesday, What's Up Wednesday show, we had TJ Hoffman came in and talked about the educators and really as leadership and coaching teams, definitely having a role in being these excellence archaeologists. Really, as you're going and visit, and this kind of comes into the non-evaluative feedback. Right now, it's so hard for a teacher, and I know because I've been talking with many of them, and I've transitioned my classroom into a blended classroom years ago. And I remember the feeling of just I had so much to do and so much to think about. And I was so mentally exhausted as I went to go do that. And that was not in a pandemic situation. And it was hard for me every once in a while to step back and look at my systems and the things that I've created and be able to say, that's good. I don't need to change that, or I can slightly transform that, make it some tweaks to that, and it's going to be better, or it's good enough for now. Let me focus on some of these other areas. Teachers don't have that ability right now. And so as leaders, if we can, through our frequent visits, I focus on identifying the good, be a witness to the good, as Jim Knight says, and making sure that you are shouting that from the rooftops and sharing that for others to see, whether they're also doing online or hybrid or not. I think that's important. And making sure that there are these teams in place. The rest of this all kind of builds up to me to psychological safety, which is something I talk a lot about. if we don't have platforms for people to be able to see and be seen, and we don't have them as opportunities for them to be able to say, like, bring your problems here and we'll work it out. It's not that we're going to just, sit here and kind of be stuck in the wallowing, but we're going to have a place to say it. Yeah. And then maybe that would help someone else. My kids' district does a really good job of this. Every Thursday, their elementary online teachers meet, and then there's another day that the secondary teachers meet. And the same individuals are in those meetings to be able to kind of say, hey, elementary had that issue. Here's what they did.
That's it. You're sharing.
So I think those are really, really valuable ways that, I know that says personal, but you can support at a personal level through some systems that you could have set in place.
One real quick point. A lot of research just suggests that loneliness is a major contributor to teacher mental health. Think about it. You're in a class. Let's do it conventionally. Yes, you're in a classroom. 7-8 hours later, you finally are resolved of your duties. Off you go. You repeat the process. Think about that multiplied over 180 days. You have to be a pretty independent, emotionally secure, and a kind of a psychologically grounded individual, if you understand my point. Now we're going to add all the other dimensions we've just described. Oh my goodness, you're going to tax even the most capable person, regardless about the rest of the folks who have been struggling prior to now. So I think we've got to be real careful. We can't assume that a teacher is going to be isolated in a classroom and now have to engage across the spectrum here in space, talking to someone 20 miles away in a house or whatever. That's just going to tax the most capable person. Why don't we go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Wow. Pardon me. Doing all right on time, or how are we doing?
Yeah, we're doing great. We're doing great. So
yeah,
I like this aspect, and sometimes I do a lot of my coaching around this, helping just think a little bit about how helping a teacher just to say, like, hey, it's okay to say no to that, or not right now, or it's okay for us to not try to make this, again, the perfect lesson. Let's pick one thing that is really the thing that you want to focus on the most, and how can I help you make that better? If you feel like right now it's good enough and you just need to coast so you can finish getting through all of your comprehension assessments so you can start to small group your kids, that's fine too. How can I help you, go through the data that you have? I think these are really important for teachers. A lot of times when we get overwhelmed, being able to go back and do like a checklist manifesto is really helpful, helping them set super small, achievable goals.
Critical.
I think it's absolutely critical for this. So helping them just manage their expectations, helping them, again, if we are being those witnesses to the good, those excellent sociologists, it helps us, gives us some ammunition when we have some of these conversations.
Even if you, and again, I'm summarizing, but if you look at the slide, it just kind of bullets 3 critical points, which is complementary to what you just mentioned. I know this is a bizarre statement. Teachers now have to accept that they are going to have limitations, correct?
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to master this in that sense of the term. I find that this is not a common mental type of concern that teachers have. They often see themselves as being omnipotent and capable. Now you almost have to do a complete 180 shift. For example, if you're online, if that's your entire dimension with the students, this is a one-dimensional experience, correct? You're sitting passively in this point, and they're engaged with you at that point. That's one-dimensional. That's a complete departure from anything that they've done in their history, even the newest teachers, correct?
Well, yeah, and that's exactly, to the point, as you mentioned earlier, we get so far in our career, typically in our profession, and then we're kind of expected to be self-sufficient and sustaining, and
totally,
everybody's a new teacher this year, whether you were literally in your first year of teaching or you were in your 30th year of teaching, you're a new teacher. Yeah, I think these are valuable.
Even setting goals. Look at the bottom there. I know it sounds a little quaint in 2020. Maybe a personal journal, some type of a reflective weekly reflection. Set goals for yourself. I'm going to accomplish X, so that you're working with some parameters. You're not just exaggerating the moment, so to speak. Because stress is daily, correct? It's not escapable. The trick is, can you minimize its impact on you? Without stress, we don't literally exist, correct? It kind of makes us function. But the trick is not to have it so overwhelming that it leads to, in fact, we can go to the next slide, which will kind of produce closure for us. See, this is where, to me, it gets encapsulated real quickly. And we know the data is becoming really seriously negative. A whole lot of people are really now feeling physical and mental health trauma, difficulties, health conditions.
Psychosomatic or
Psychosomatic. I read somewhere years and years ago, don't laugh, something like in one urban district, 80% of the teachers were around psychotropic kind of drugs, if that makes any sense to you. I know it sounds hysterically funny, but it's really not. I've had teachers tell me when I'm working with them that that's the reason they can function. So if we're at that level, who's going to sustain that for an entire 9 months? That's not humanly possible. So I think these positives are crucial. You have to have a physical well-being to function, correct? That's just automatic. I'm not too sure teachers are really as careful about this as one would think. You can pick up all the literature about exercising, proper diet, Mediterranean, yoga now, mindfulness training. I think all of this has been underestimated. Now it's like really crucial. Develop a hobby, something that occupies your mind and your emotional welfare outside of the rigors of work, correct? You can't do this 7 days a week. It's not possible.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's hard, I think.
Yeah, very much so.
Or when I'm overwhelmed and I'm stressed, the best thing for me is to just set it down and walk away and engage in something that's going to fill my soul. And that's so hard to do.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but we had a really great interview with Kelly Garris on episode 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And she talked about this idea of time management and self-care for us as coaches and as teachers. And it really does have an impact on our ability to function in the stress. So how having those conversations with teachers, or getting some fitness health accountability groups going within your organization. Maybe we're going to do a water challenge this week, so we're all, whether you're in-person teaching or online teaching, we're all going to try to drink X amount of ounces of water. Check in with each other. I mean, I really see this as a role for us as coaches this year, especially as we get started, is just to kind of really be there to support, of course, academically and the instruction piece, but I think our job is to really help keep expectations manageable, help teachers identify where things are going well, be a resource for them to think of things outside of their general scope of teaching and learning, and what are some ways they can help manage this.
One thing I'd like to say, I'm sure we're getting close to closure. This is a bizarre idea, but you have to think about it for a couple of seconds. Everything we do involves energy, correct? Yes? Energy. Well, and I got to have a little sense of humor. I'm teaching 12-year-olds. And one 12-year-old boy in particular, they have enough energy in their pinky to dominate a 25-year-old teacher, correct? Yes?
Correct.
So I know this is a little quirky, but when I work with teachers prior to now, I always ask them, I want them to maximize their energy. Well, the way you do that is to have a sense of psychological comfort and peace, correct? Yes? Besides all the good welfare things we just mentioned.
Balance.
So someone could say to me, what have I learned over all the decades? It's about energy. I know this sounds quaint. I say it a lot in my workshops. You have to be proactive. If you can do it that way, you're saving yourself from all the impacts, stress, and all those complications. You know my point exactly, correct?
I do.
And I think this is why some teachers, pardon my honesty, don't work with the middle school age, because by definition, their entire development is based on energy, correct? True?
Yeah, those are my favorite kiddos to work with. I'm a middle school teacher.
People are natural at it, and I think that's why, because they're simpatico with the energy, physically and psychologically, of the audience. Elementary, what can you say about a 9-year-old? They want a lot of drama, excitement, activity. That takes a full effort from the adult. So I would say to the teachers, manage your energy wisely, be proactive to the extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. Good sleep, a good night's sleep does wonders. So
incredible.
Well, Don, this has been a great 2-part episode series with you. Thanks for joining us these past 2 weeks, talking about supporting teacher mental health. Bring some really good, solid, again, a lot of what we're seeing this year is it's not necessarily anything groundbreakingly new. It's really just innovative ways of doing some of the things that we know are sound, applying them to these new scenarios, reminding us that, these things are here. So I appreciate your time and your expertise for our audience.
My pleasure. I wish everyone the very, very best. Maybe we can do a session as the year progresses, maybe move on.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll have you back for sure.
No
All right. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. We've got an exciting episode with Dr. Stephanie Affinito talking about some reading comprehension strategies, especially if you're virtual. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe to wherever you tune into this show, whether it's podcast or on our web shows. And we will all see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Have a great one.
Bye.